financial obligations, the first time ever. Economists say it won't be long before financial markets react negatively to this continued uncertainty. I believe, Mr. President, that Monday is a legal holiday, and I believe that the markets will be closed. That's good, because what I see staring us in the face is not a pleasant picture. Now, everyone should understand that a bad day on Wall Street doesn't just affect these great big banks or wealthy investors. It affects everyone in our country, not only those with 401ks, those that have no savings. It affects everybody, because everyone will lose, not only in America, but around the world. The life savings of ordinary Americans are at risk, and that's an understatement. And while this uncertainty is bad, default would be unthinkably worse. But, Mr. President, to show my angst is real, one only need to look at what took place in the House of Representatives this morning. They walked out of another meeting, a conference, a caucus, call it what you want, defiant. We couldn't do anything. Therefore, the government remains closed, and the debt ceiling is every day closer and closer, every hour now. And while this uncertainty is bad, I repeat, default is just unthinkably worse. Mr. President, because of the collapse in Wall Street a few years ago, state of Nevada and all over the country, states were hammered. That was only 5 years ago. Americans lost their jobs, lost their homes, and their savings. So did people around the world. The country is beginning to recover, but it's not in great shape. But the crisis we now face is one of even greater proportion. The government has remained closed now for, I think we're at 12 days now. To think about this, 4 states are buying into programs so that national parks can stay open. National parks, the brainchild of Republican Theodore Roosevelt. It is really so sad what's happened to our country. Defaulting on our debt would risk millions of American jobs. Not thousands, not tens of thousands, not 100,000s, but millions of jobs. Social Security checks would likely be halted. Medicare payments and even paychecks for our troops wouldn't happen. So without exception, the most respected economists and business minds of our time have said if America defaults on its debt, there will be dire consequences. We've heard this from everybody, not only economists, but business people. Mr. President, I was happy to see the Republicans engaged in talks with the President, House Republicans. That's over with. It's done. They're not talking anymore. We learned that this morning. But I say to my friends on the Republican side of this Senate, time's running out. They've urged their more radical members to compromise. For example, my friend, the senior senator from Arizona, Mr. President, that man came to the Congress of the United States with me and the assistant leader. We've been together for 31 years. Here's what he said, sensible words. Senior senator from Arizona, quote, sooner or later the government will resume its function. Sooner or later we'll raise the debt limit. The question is, how do we get there? Why don't we do this sooner rather than later? Why doesn't the Senate lead? To that end, we're trying. We're going to have a vote, 50 minutes, on a long-term measure to avert default and give the economy the certainty it needs. I've told my Republican friends, Madam President, allowing the government to operate again, that's not a favor to me. It's not a favor to the presiding officer. It's not a favor to Democrats on this side of the aisle. It's something that should just happen. We shouldn't consider this a time we're doing favors for individuals, groups. We should just understand that the government should open because it should never have closed in the first place. And the debt ceiling, my reasonable Republicans should understand this should be extended, not for a couple of weeks, a couple of months. It should be extended for a long time. We shouldn't have this fight. To think that this is only a motion to proceed to the legislation. It's not a vote on the measure itself. And the Republicans, I have been told, they're all going to vote against this. What a sad day for America. They are voting to not allow us to even debate whether the debt ceiling should be raised. Are they afraid of that? Do they just want this to go away? It's not going to go away. Each hour that goes by, we are closer to a calamity for our country. The economy needs more stability and short-term Republican proposals. Congress and the country must not be back in the position a few weeks from now of worrying whether Republicans will force our nation to the default of our financial obligations. And to think, House Republicans are saying, well, we'll extend the debt for a little while, but we're not going to reopen government. Wow, that is so logical and so sensible and so good for the country. And that is, I've said that very, very sarcastically. Senate Democrats' position has been and remains this: reopen the government, pay our country's bills so we can move forward with good faith negotiations on a long-term budget. It's not too late for my Republican colleagues to do the right thing for this country. I'm so concerned that it seems the worry about whether the country should have a functioning government and should extend its debt ceiling is only Democrats. That isn't the way it should be. I admire President Obama for doing what he's done the last few days. He has invited every member of Congress, 535, to meet with him. First, he had the House Republicans, then he had Senate Democrats, another meeting, and then Senate Republicans and House Republicans who, remember, the last time my friend, the Speaker, was on television, he said maybe, 18 times, I haven't counted them, he wanted to have a conversation. The President took him up on that, invited all 232 members of the Republican caucus to come down to the White House and visit with him. They refused that. They sent 20 down. So I appreciate the President being willing to talk to all of us, and he's done that in detail. The problem is the conversation is one way. The Republicans are not interested, it appears at this stage, of doing anything constructive to extend the debt ceiling, to open the government. Later. That's what they always say.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the time until 12 noon will be equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees.
Madam President.
The Assistant Minority Leader.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, at 12 o'clock noon, we will vote on this S 1569. It's barely one page, but it is of more significance than anyone can imagine, because it basically is an opportunity for us to start the debate, not to end the debate, to start the debate on whether or not the United States of America will default on its debt for the first time in the history of this nation. Other nations have defaulted: Argentina, Venezuela, Cameroon. We have never defaulted. And as a result of that, the United States dollar is the soundest currency in the world. Think about it for a second. Where else would you turn? The United States dollar is the soundest currency, and buying the debt of the United States is considered to be the single safest investment any person, business, or country can make. You know, we didn't just inherit this. We earned this. Because every year the United States has been a nation, we have paid our bills. Now that is being brought into question. And today at noon, on the floor of the United States Senate, there is going to be a vote on this measure as to whether or not we proceed with the debate over paying our bills. Sadly, we are told that not a single Republican senator will join us in just allowing the debate on paying our bills. That is a sad commentary. When you think about it, it is taking the events of the last week or two to the extreme. It was bad enough to shut down the government of the United States. When the Republicans decided that shutting down the government was a great political move, the American people said, "Are you out of your mind? 800,000 people are going to be furloughed. We're going to stop the services of our government." And for the last 12 days, we have seen every single day another indicator, another piece of news about how that government shutdown is hurting ordinary people across America. Whether it's those who were denied clinical trials at the National Institutes of Health, right outside Washington, D.C., clinical trials that literally were life and death decisions, whether we are talking about food inspection, reading the newspaper about salmonella poisoning and realizing the Republican government shutdown is reducing the number of federal food inspectors, the list goes on and on and on. But I will tell you this, as sad and unfair as it is for the Republican shutdown of the government to result in 800,000 furloughed federal employees, the hardships on their families, and the hardships on all the Americans who count on their jobs and basic services of the federal government, this is worse. This is worse. The Republican shutdown has reached a new level of recklessness, a new level of irresponsibility if we default on America's debt. Sadly, it will mean the victims will not just be federal employees and their families. No, not even just those who count on government services. The victims will be virtually every person and every family in America. Now, is that an exaggeration? Just another politician, reaching extreme rhetoric here on the floor? Let me quote a few people who do this for a living, people we trust. The Treasury Secretary, Jack Lew, at a Finance Committee hearing on October the 13th, said failing to raise the debt ceiling will impact everyday Americans beyond its impact on financial markets. Between October 17th and November 1st, Treasury Secretary Lew said, we have large payments to Medicare providers, Social Security beneficiaries, and veterans, as well as salaries for active duties of the military. A failure to raise the debt limit could put timely payment of all of these at risk. Of course, he's a government employee, an appointee of the administration. You might say, well, let's discount that. He's just putting the president's political spin on this. So let's go to Frank Keating, no friend of this administration. He's the head of the American Bankers Association. Before a banking committee hearing on October the 10th, he said, and I quote, "Ordinary Americans will bear the brunt of the damage if our leaders do not prevent the United States from defaulting on its debt for the first time in history." He went on to say it would raise the cost of borrowing for business, meaning job losses and price increases, be a blow to retirement funds, leaving fewer resources available for retirees. For banks, which hold $3 trillion in Treasury, agency, and mortgage-backed securities, the sharp decline in value of these securities would translate into fewer resources available for mortgages, business, auto, credit card, and student loans. To put it in layman's terms, Mr. Keating, the head of the American Bankers Association, is saying if the Congress fails to extend the debt ceiling, as we are proposing to do today, interest rates will go up. Interest rates on ordinary Americans, ordinary families, and ordinary businesses. This is entirely preventable. I'll tell you in the past, let me just lay the cards on the table. I've been in the House and the Senate. Nobody wants to vote for this because most people don't understand it. Oh, so you want us to go further in debt, Senator. That's why you voted for it. That's not the case. The debt limit is paying off the bills we have already incurred. It's like going to a fancy restaurant and ordering the best meal on the menu, eating the meal, and when they come to ask you to pay the check, say, no, I'm not paying the check. You see, I'm a fiscal conservative. I just don't believe in extravagant eating. You just ate the meal, and now you're not going to pay the check? That's what this is all about. We have incurred these bills. Now the question is whether we will pay these bills. And that's what it comes down to. This is very basic and fundamental. At noon, there will be a vote on the floor of the Senate, which will have a direct impact on everyone in this country. And the question is whether the Republicans, fresh from the failure of their government shutdown, are going to dig a deeper hole, not just for their party, forget that completely, but for this nation. Whether they're going to create a new group of victims beyond federal employees that include every member, every family, every business in America. That is what's at stake. Madam President, I'm not exaggerating. I think this may be the single most irresponsible thing I've seen in the time that I've served in Washington. To let this happen is not good for this nation. It's not fair to the people of this nation. And then to watch what happens on Monday, the majority leader said that the markets are closed on Monday. It turns out, I'm told the bond market is closed, but the stock market is open. That stock market, incidentally, is where your mutual funds live, where the stocks that you own for your savings and retirement live, and where your savings live. And this irresponsible action, sadly, is likely to create a decline in value of your hard-earned savings. It can be avoided. What would it take? 6 Republicans. That's what it takes. The Democrats are prepared to move forward and extend the debt ceiling. We need 6 moderate Republicans who will step up and join us. And if they will, we'll move forward. We'll accept the responsibility of ultimately voting for whatever bill there is to extend the debt ceiling. We're asking 6 Republicans to give us a chance to vote. If they say no at noon today, the consequences could be awful for this great nation. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Vermont.
Madam President, I hope the country listens to what the senior senator from Illinois said. The ramifications of this is not a political exercise. This is not a bumper sticker thing. This is hitting every single family, every single person in America. It doesn't make any difference whether they're Democrats, Republicans, Independents. It's going to hurt, and hurt badly, whether you're saving money for your child to go to college, for your retirement, you're paying bills for an illness. All of you are going to be impacted. So I thank the distinguished senior senator. And Madam President, you know, this 12th day that we're paralyzed by this unnecessary shutdown, there are real things that are coming about because of it. I'll give you another example. I've given several examples on the floor about how Vermonters are suffering due to this Tea Party shutdown. But I think the distinguished presiding officer probably has similar examples in her Commonwealth of Massachusetts or others here. You know, earlier this year, I worked with Senator Crapo, Republican from Idaho. We built the support we needed to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act, VAWA. And the Senate and the House passed the legislation that Senator Crapo and I wrote, and we did it with strong bipartisan votes. The president signed it. We put our differences aside, and we are philosophically very different. But we put those differences aside to help the people we serve, whether it's in Idaho, Vermont, Massachusetts, or anywhere else. But now we have October, which marks Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So many of the life-saving programs we put in this are caught in the crossfire of the Tea Party shutdown. Today, as federal funds are being held hostage by the Tea Party shutdown, we're starting to see the real toll of this brinkmanship. In Franklin County, Vermont, northwestern county in our state, advocates were hopeful when they learned the new grant would allow one staff person to help victims of LGBT domestic assault in that rural region. Of course, this hope is given away to frustration because the funds promised on October 1st did not come through. In Barre City, joins our capital city, Montpelier. Barre is where my father was born. Has a population of 9,200. The police force has furloughed 2 half-time detectives who are providing 24/7 coverage for special responses to domestic violence cases. And they're also providing critical training to their colleagues on how to answer these challenging calls. Madam President, I had experience as a prosecutor in Vermont, and I saw how terrible these domestic violence cases can be, and they occur in every state. And I would bet that every single state can give an example of what this shutdown has meant, the same as Barrie, Vermont. There's a long list of programs funded with VAWA grants that continue to provide services to victims and incur the related costs based on the hope they might be reimbursed once funding is restored, while the Tea Party says maybe the check will be in the mail. They had no choice, because despite what the Tea Party might think, you close the spigot on funding, it doesn't mean the victims go away. Victims are victims are victims. And I still have nightmares of some of these scenes I saw at 3 o'clock in the morning when I was a prosecutor. They are still occurring. We can at least cut way back on them and help people, Americans. But I also say, what's going to happen to victims and their children when the money for WIC, the TANF programs, run dry? We know many domestic violence survivors have to rely on these supports when they leave their abusers. In the past, they had to stick with their abusers because they had to feed the children. Now, at least they've got a lifeline out there, and if you combine that with the impending cuts to the supplemental nutrition assistance programs that the Tea Party wants, I wonder whether this is going to cause these victims and their children to stay in the homes of the abusers just so the children can be fed. This is America. This is America. None of these Tea Party members, they all get paid. They're getting paid today. They get their expenses. They get their staff. They can fly back and forth. They can go on television, all that. They're not facing this abuse. They're not facing the question how they feed their children. Chris Lukens, the director of Voices Against Violence in St. Albans, Vermont, says the uncertainty is the hardest part, both for her agency and the victims it serves. At the end of the last week, the first of the Tea Party shut down, she said, we are fielding a lot of calls from survivors who don't know how they're going to make ends meet. People just don't know what the impact will be. So you get abused first by whoever the abuser is, and now you're going to get abused by this Tea Party shutdown. So let's end the uncertainty. Let's end the shutdown. Let's fulfill our promises to the people we're here to represent. The continuing resolution passed by the Senate, a resolution which, after all, was asked for by the House of Representatives and was a compromise with them, could end the stalemate. You know, the leadership in the House of Representatives should have the courage to bring it to a vote. The courage, not necessarily for their own political needs, but the courage for the needs of America. Madam President, I yield.
Madam President.
Senator from Virginia.
Madam President, I first of all want to thank my colleague, the senator from Vermont, for his comments and his relentless voice about folks whose concerns are not often heard in the halls of this institution, and thank him for his work and the fact of who continues to be hurt by this absurd government shutdown. I really think we're almost in kind of the era of the theater of the absurd at this point. We've had a government shutdown for 11 plus days, 4 days, 5 days from a default. And what I keep wondering is we hear about some of the least fortunate who are being hurt. The remarkable thing as well is how much of our economy is being hurt all across the board. I got called 2 nights ago by a chairman of a company from Northern Virginia, 5,500 employees. This company had been built by this first-generation American. He's extraordinarily proud of what he's done for his company, for his employees. This company serves our government, so-called government contractor. A lot of these companies, not only in Virginia, Maryland, across this region, across this country. Well, when the shutdown started, 30% of his 5,500 employees were said they're not essential. So the company has been trying to make ends meet, keeping these folks furloughed, but not firing them, trying to pay them a little something during this period. The remarkable thing is the 70% of the employees that were deemed essential, they're not getting paid either, even though the government says they're going to pay them, because the folks who process the checks are furloughed. Now, anybody that operates a business on a cash flow basis knows that when the money runs out, even if you've got a potential IOU, if you can't go to the bank and borrow money, you shut down. This company, 25 years in the building, the CEO, this chairman said that, this goes on a week or 2 weeks more, his life's work, and he said more importantly than his life's work, the 5,500 people who depend upon this company's existence may very well disappear. That's just part of the government shutdown. Today we're going to vote on an issue that I never thought in my time in public sector or private sector that we would be seriously considering, and that is the default of the United States of America. I've spent longer on the private sector side than I have on the public sector side, but I never thought I would see a headline that I saw this week in the Financial Times, an international financial newspaper, where the headline was, Japan and China and Russia say, America, pay your bills. America, pay your bills. America, the largest economy in the world, the country that has been granted because of our exemplary behavior for decades, the status of the reserve currency. Now, what does reserve currency mean? It means that every American business does a little bit better than every other business around the world because the dollar is the currency that everybody else goes to when times are tough. Well, there are countries, not all of them friendly to us, who are saying, well, maybe the dollar shouldn't be the reserve currency anymore. And if we lose that status, that doesn't come back overnight. It's not where we can say, oops, or the Tea Party crowd can say, whoops, we maybe made a mistake. We want to roll that back. Once it's gone, it could be literally decades to get it back. People might say, well, what would make you think that? Well, if you look since the beginning of the 21st century, I saw one of the TV news networks validated this yesterday, there's only been one country, one industrial country in the world that's defaulted since the year 2000, Argentina. Now, America's not Argentina, but Argentina, back in December of 2001, defaulted. Prior to that time, Argentina, per capita income, was the richest country in South America, way ahead of Chile, Brazil, other nations in that region. Once Argentina defaulted, the value of its currency fell by 75%. Inflation hit over 100% a year. Every Argentine family lost over half of their net worth. And today, 12 years after Argentina defaulted, it falls way below, on an annual income, average income basis, most of the countries of South America. Now, America's not Argentina. It may not be that catastrophic, but why would anyone take the chance? Why would anyone decide in this uncharted area to potentially threaten default? That is like playing Russian roulette with one bullet and only two chambers. No responsible nation would do that. So we've heard from some on the other side, well, here's what we ought to do. Maybe we'll kind of default, but we'll pay our bonds and we'll pay Social Security, pay our military, and then everything else, well, that'll be put on hold. That, to me, shows a remarkable, fundamental lack of understanding of how government or economics works. No government has ever tried that. But let's, for the sake of argument, suppose that somehow that quote-unquote prioritization scheme might stave off America defaulting for a week or two. Here's the other half of the story, though, that they don't acknowledge. Even if America pays its debt, on that list of prioritization does not appear Medicaid, education, transportation, law enforcement. And you know where a lot of those dollars go? Those dollars don't stay spent at the federal level. They're spent at your state government level. They're spent at your local government level. I had the great honor of being governor of Virginia before I came to the Senate. We worked really hard to keep a AAA bond rating. But in the Commonwealth of Virginia, in the state of Maryland, I see my colleague from Maryland, I see my colleague from Louisiana here, state of Louisiana, every one of these states, at least a third of their state budgets are dollars that pass from the federal government down to the state level. We could see within a week or maybe even less, every state government, every local government in America either have a budget crisis or default. We could have the story of what's happening in Detroit happen across every community in America, not because of mistakes made at the local level or state level, but because of the irresponsibility of a group of folks up here who don't understand the economics that you don't mess with the full faith and credit of America. What other costs are we playing with here? Well, many of the folks who've been most adamant about keeping the government shut, which, by the way, will cost the taxpayers more. It will not save us a dime. Federal employees will be paid, but starting and stopping all these government contracts will hurt the economy, decrease tax revenues, and actually cost taxpayers more. But what may be even more jeopardizing than those actions would be, with this kind of irresponsible testing of the markets or brinksmanship, you could see interest rates rise. For every 1 point of increased interest payment on our debt, that accounts for $110 billion of additional federal government payments every year. A 1% interest on the debt increase over a 10-year basis, that's an extra $1 trillion of government spending that has a priority over any other aspect of federal government spending. You talk about a tax hike that gets America nothing from a group that says we don't want to increase taxes at any cost. Well, playing with the debt ceiling, 1% interest, $110 billion tax hike on every American family, every American business. And again, that you can't say a few days later, oops, and the market would then take back down our interest rates. So, Madam President, I know other colleagues are here and they want to speak as well. I and my business life, my time as governor, my time as senator, have never seen an action that gets nearly as irresponsible as the actions taken by this. And I don't think this is the majority of the colleagues on the other side, but this small cohort of ideologues who are willing to do whatever, including burn down the House, to try to achieve their goals. So we're going to have a chance here in the Senate in about 20 minutes to decide whether we will take off the threat of America defaulting. The Asian markets open within 40 hours. The world is going to see whether America is going to maintain its position as reserve currency, world's largest economy, most stable financial basis. I hope that we'll take a step today to at least remove the threat of default, to encourage our friends on the House side to do that, as well as reopen this government. And then, yes, let's go ahead and get our fiscal house in order. But putting America's fiscal reputation, to put the kind of companies who are in jeopardy with the shutdown, is not the kind of governance that America needs at this point. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Senator from New York.
Well, first, let me thank my colleague from Virginia for his outstanding words. He knows this from a business perspective, an economic perspective, a political perspective, and has been such a strong and vital voice about America paying its bills. I'd just like to add a couple of things here. We have a group of people in the House and in the Senate, not a majority of the other side, but some who we call debt ceiling deniers. They deny that letting the debt ceiling lapse, going into default, could be cataclysmic for America. They're wrong. Every person who has studied this knows it's wrong, and the debt ceiling deniers fall in two camps. Some say that, well, we can pay certain debts and not other debts, and that would be all right. Well, let them choose. Pick Social Security over veterans, pick payments to mothers, pregnant mothers, versus payments for food safety. Can't do it. And then they say, well, maybe we should just pay treasuries that come due and say not pay Social Security. Well, let me tell you, as somebody who's consulted experts on the market, the overwhelming view is that if we don't pay any of our bills for the first time in U.S. history, that the markets could very well freeze up, tighten, and create huge damage to our country. Second group of debt ceiling deniers say, well, we can just, we don't know the date. We don't. The markets are mystical. But once they come to their almost magical conclusion that the U.S. is going to default, we are in trouble. That could be the 17th. It could be a day or two before, the 15th or 16th, importuning us to action as soon as possible. It could be a little bit later, but we don't know when it is, and what a risk. Madam President, we are like a blindfolded man walking towards the edge of a cliff. And if we keep walking, we will fall off. You can debate whether we fall off in 5 yards, 50 yards, or 500 yards, but we will fall off, and we don't know what that line is. Why risk it? And one final point. This could be as bad or worse than the 2008 recession. It's the same basic principle. A very important security, in that case mortgage securities, in this case treasuries, loses tremendous value. The markets freeze, loans can't be made, interest rates rise, and all the ensuing economic damage. Auto sales will go down and thousands of auto workers will be laid off. Home sales will go down and construction workers will be laid off. That's what happened in 2008. And it could well happen again and be worse, because this will be worldwide. U.S. Treasuries are probably the most widely held denomination of assets on financial institution books, and deeper. More institutions have more of them than had mortgage securities. So we are playing with fire. And I would make a plea to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. I know we all have political agendas. I'd very much like to see the immigration bill pass. We all have agendas that are very important to us. Please do not hold debt ceiling, paying our debts hostage, to any other condition. Pass a debt ceiling unconditionally, and then we can go back to our business, debate these issues, and see where the political chips fall. But please, please, for the sake of this country, for the sake of the men and women who labored before us and never let us default, do not play with fire. Pass a clean debt ceiling, and let's move on and debate the other issues that so much deserve debate. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Louisiana.
Thank you, Madam President. I came to the floor today to add my voice to the voices that have spoken since 11 o'clock our time about the importance of opening this government and sending a strong signal that the United States Congress will not default on its debt, that we will pay our bills, we will honor the commitments that we've made, not only to bondholders outside of our country, but to our own constituents who hold Treasury bonds in their pension funds and their 401ks, that use it to balance their investments in their businesses, because they know that they can count on those notes to be paid. And until just a few days ago, it seemed like that would happen. And recently, in the last 48 hours, there is a real question as to if a small group of Republicans in the House understand how high this cliff is and how close we are to it. This problem is completely manufactured by a group of people that came here, elected to office to do this exact thing, shut the government down at any expense. As a senator from Virginia just said, burn the whole house down with children inside. They came here with that expressed purpose. And they are wrong, and they are pushing this country to a terrible place. Now, Leader Reid has explained it. Senator Schumer from New York has explained it. Mark Warner, the senior senator from Virginia, who's literally one of the finest governors we've had in the last 50 years in America, and I say that respectfully and honestly. We all know what a great governor he was, and he's now joined by another great governor from Virginia, Governor Kane. These men are senators, but they also understand that our governors now are at risk. Every governor, Republican and Democratic governor, and all of the state governments, and the thousands of cities and villages. Yesterday, we received a letter signed by the Governors Association, Democratic and Republican governors, saying, open the government. Do not let the government default. Why? Because in our system of government, which is the best in the world, it's not perfect, but it is the best in the world ever created by men and women. Frail human beings, we make a lot of mistakes. We made so many mistakes in the creation of our country, and we still continue to do it, but we are really trying to build a model of democracy, the best the earth has ever known. And there's a group of people in the House that decided that for some reason they don't like the democracy. I don't know what they want to go back to, but it's taken us 230 plus years to get here. I don't think anybody wants to go back to a place where the world had no democracy. There were elections. People won those elections. President Obama won his election. He did not carry my state, but he won his election fair and square. And he campaigned on providing middle-class families for the first time in America a way to purchase health insurance. Not a single-payer system, not a government system, to purchase health insurance so they would not be one accident away from financial ruin. Shame on President Obama. Shame on him for suggesting something so radical. That moms and dads could go to sleep at night knowing that if an accident happened the next day, they would not have to take bankruptcy or choose between a child disfigured and a child that needed to go to college. Shame on President Obama. How dare him suggest such a thing? Now, if they don't like the bill, they can change the bill. We did not wake up one morning and declare this the law. The people of the United States declared this through us as their representatives. And if they don't like it, they can unelect us. Believe me, they'll have a great chance because I'm up for re-election right now. They will be able to do that. But that is the way you do it. You don't threaten to shut down the government. Now, I'm going to run for re-election. I'm standing on this election as a supporter of the Affordable Care Act, not because it's a perfect law, but because it is much better for all the people that I represent than what we had before, the wealthy people, the middle-class people, and the poor people. We argued and fought in public, in meetings for 40 years about how to do this. This wasn't a last-minute, behind-the-scenes deal that nobody read, or have they lost their minds? We debated this for 40 years through every kind of president you could think of, conservative, liberal, different kinds of Congresses. And I know we have to vote in 10 minutes, and I know other people are going to want to speak, but I'll just take a few more minutes to finish this up. Contrary to popular belief and what Fox News says, people here read the bill. For 40 years, we read the bill. But we didn't have to read bills. All we had to look at was the face of kids dying of cancer that had no way to get cures. All we had to do was talk to people that came in our office every day and said, Senators, can't you do something? My insurance is going up. I can't find it. I want to get out of my job. I've worked for GE my whole life. I have a better idea. I'd like to create a job, but I can't leave because my wife has cancer. I don't need to read a bill. I'll listen to my constituents. That's what this is about. Then when they decided they couldn't they're going to shut down the government because they can repeal this law, now they're deciding that, well, that didn't work so well, and that's not making a lot of sense to people, so now we're going to negotiate on we don't know what, but we have to get something out of this. How dare them? How dare this group of radicals, led by the senator from Texas, how dare them take the greatest democracy on earth hostage? Who gives them that right? Do they think they're divine by God? They are not. None of us here. And God could run this world perfectly, but he doesn't run it. He's in heaven. And until then, we have to be as imperfect as we are, try to figure out his will through the democratic process. But they've decided that's not good enough. Well, I don't know anything on earth that's better. Maybe they can figure it out in the next 48 hours. But people have been thinking about that for 6 or 7 or 8,000 years or longer. I don't think 48 hours is going to help them. So anyway, we're here today, and what I would like to say is that I agree with everything that my Senate colleagues have said. I would urge our colleagues to vote to open the government, to not hold the United States government and the world and all the kids in the world, all the adults in the world, all the businesses in the world hostage over their antics. And more practically, in Louisiana, let me say that I've got 400,000 people that need us to fix flood insurance. They are really hurting. I have 200,000 people that live in Houma that have waited for a levee around their city for now 25 years and have been told by the Corps, yes, we'll build it, then they didn't, yes, we'll build it, then they didn't. I need to get on that. I've got permits in the Gulf of Mexico, and I see my friend here. I'm going to turn it over to her from California, and we have a little different view on this, Senator Boxer and I, but people in Louisiana like to drill for oil. We'd like to get our permits to do that, but because this ideological group has shut down the government, there are no permits being issued to produce the oil and gas necessary to keep our country strong. I could go on. So let me just say, let us reason together. We can find many things to negotiate about. I am open to many negotiations, as are the Democrats, but to threaten the core of this democracy, fought so long and so hard over decades by brave men and women, is really beyond the pale. And I yield the floor.
Madam President,
Senator from California.
I want to thank my colleague from Louisiana. I'm so appreciative to her because she is just telling it like it is. She's sincere. She cares about her state. And let me reassure her, she and I, we don't agree in terms of the parameters of oil drilling in Keystone and other things, and that has nothing to do with our friendship. But you're absolutely right, Senator Landrieu. You deserve to have those permits run through the process. It's ridiculous. Just as the road builders are waiting to have the EPA finish up the environmental studies so they can get moving on these roads. This government shutdown is brutal. And the reason that I'm rising, just very briefly, because I know I want to leave time for my friend from Oregon to say a few words. I'm rising today because I want to be so crystal clear to the people who might be watching us today on this unusual Saturday session. We are in the midst of a Republican government shutdown. I'm going to say that again. We are in the midst of a Republican shutdown of the government of the United States of America. The United States Senate passed a clean bill to reopen the government. It's sitting over there at Speaker Boehner's house, and he is blocking all ability to open up this government. That's number one. And now we are getting frighteningly close to a default. And we're getting very close to the point where America won't be able to pay its bills. And the cost of that to our nation, to our people, to our reputation, to our economy, to our taxpayers, cannot be overstated. Disaster. And we have a chance now to pass a clean debt ceiling bill, which means we will not default, and I hope my colleagues will vote for it. They're filibustering it. We need 60 votes, and I would hope somebody will come to their senses over there, because the results of not doing it would be disastrous. And I think Senator Warner has spoken very clearly about what this means from the perspective as both a former governor and a businessman. I ask unanimous consent to place in the record a newspaper article entitled "Business, Labor, and Nonprofits Demand That the Shutdown End Immediately."
Without objection.
And I'm just going to read a little bit from it and leave the remainder for my friend from Oregon. The most prominent names in business, labor, and nonprofit world on Friday, that's yesterday, demanded that Washington immediately end the government shutdown. In a joint letter sent to the president and lawmakers, leaders of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the AFL-CIO, and the United Way Worldwide said the shutdown shouldn't continue another day. Quote, "As leaders of business, labor, and the nonprofit sector, we are writing to urge you to end the federal government shutdown immediately. While we may disagree on priorities for federal policies, and we even have conflicting views about many issues, we are in complete agreement that the current shutdown is harmful and the risk of default is potentially catastrophic for our fragile economy." And it goes on. I want to say to my Republican friends, wake up. This isn't a letter from one Democratic group or a liberal group or even a centrist group. This is a letter from America, from the business leaders and the workers and the nonprofit leaders. You are so out of step, it's frightening. Vote with us for a clean debt ceiling so we will not default and we don't send a terrible message to the markets. And open this government now. Take up the Senate bill over there, Speaker Boehner. Put it up for a vote. Let's open this government and give it back to the American people because they deserve it. They don't deserve to be treated this way. They don't deserve to be hurt. Thank you, and I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Oregon.
The words fiscal responsibility have echoed in this chamber time after time, and they have been put forward in defense of a series of strategies this year that can only be described as incredibly irresponsible. Let's turn the clock back 6 months, when we tried to convene a budget conference committee with the House, and it was blocked. The budget conference committee was not blocked with the argument of fiscal responsibility. And yet that was a blockade of putting together a budget so that we could have a smart plan to go forward and a foundation for the appropriation bills. And then colleagues across the aisle blocked the appropriations process. They argued it was fiscally responsible to do so. But that meant keeping programs that are not working and continuing them rather than replacing them with better plans. So that too was irresponsible. And then we had folks argue, well, it will be fiscally responsible if we shut down the government. But this is costing America. This is decreasing revenue. This is increasing expenses, and it is increasing the deficit. Therefore, we have imposed by this group that argues in the name of fiscal responsibility, we have a tax across America, the government shutdown tax imposed on families across the land. And if that was not enough to block the budget process, not enough to block the appropriations process, not enough to shut down the government, now we have a group that wants to go even further. They have their grand default strategy. They want the United States to default, and they argue that this will do us well fiscally. And they couldn't be more wrong. In the Banking Committee, we had a series of experts come in, and we asked the question, what will happen? What will happen if we default? And just simple examples were given. For example, the interest rate will go up on mortgages. A 1% increase on the mortgage means for a family buying a $200,000 house, about $120 more per month. That is the shutdown and the default tax that colleagues are imposing on families across America. And it doesn't stop there. Everything based on interest rates goes up. Everything based on income from economic activity goes down. Expenses of safety net programs go up. In other words, the deficit goes up and the debt goes up. So let's stop this irresponsibility of blocking the budget process, blocking the appropriations process, shutting down the government, and imposing a default tax on families across this land. It is not only incredibly wrong-headed, it is doing great damage to families in every county, in every state across the United States of America. Let's, at this moment, in this vote we're about to have, end this attack on the American families. Let's end this irresponsibility. Thank you, Madam President.
Can I do it now? The clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the motion to proceed to S-1569, a bill to ensure the complete and timely payment of the obligations of the United States government until December 31st, 2014, signed by 17 senators.
By unanimous consent, the mandatory quorum call has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that debate on the motion to proceed to S-1569, a bill to ensure the complete and timely payment of the obligations of the United States government until December 31st, 2014, and for other purposes, shall be brought to a close? The yeas and nays are mandatory under the rule. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. Ms. Ayotte. Ms. Baldwin. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Baucus. Mr. Begich. Mr. Bennett. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Bozeman. Mrs. Boxer. Mr. Brown. Mr. Burr. Ms. Cantwell. Mr. Cardin. Mr. Carper. Mr. Casey. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Chiesa. Mr. Coates. I gotcha. Here. Graham? Yeah, he voted no. Mr. Coburn? I did. Mr. Cochran? Sure. Ms. Collins? Mr. Coons? Mr. Corker? Mr. Helen? Mr. Crapo? Mr. Cruz? Mr.
Mr. Donnelly. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Enzi. Mrs. Feinstein. Mrs. Fisher. Mr. Flake. Mr. Franken. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Mrs. Hagan. Mr. Harkin. Mr. Hatch. Mr. Heinrich. Ms. Heitkamp. Mr. Heller. Ms. Hirono. Mr. Hoven. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Isaacson. Mr. Johans. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota. Mr. Kane. Mr. King. Mr. Kirk. Ms. Klobuchar. Ms. Landrieu. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Lee. Mr. Levin. Mr. Manchin. Mr. Markey. Mr. McCain. Mrs. McCaskill. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Merkley. Ms. Mikulski. Mr. Moran. Ms. Murkowski. Mr. Murphy. Mrs. Murray. Mr. Nelson. Mr. Paul. Mr. Portman. Mr. Pryor. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island. Mr. Reed of Nevada. Mr. Kane. Mr. Risch. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Schatz. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Scott. Mr. Sessions. Mrs. Shaheen. Mr. Shelby. Ms. Stabenow. Mr. Tester. Mr. Thune. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Udall of Colorado. Mr. Udall of New Mexico. Mr. Vitter. Mr. Warner. Ms. Warren. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden. Senators voting in the affirmative: Begich, Bennett, Boxer, Carper, Durbin, Franken, Hagan, Kane, King, Klobuchar, Landrieu, Leahy, Manchin, Merkley, Nelson, Reed of Rhode Island, Rockefeller, Schatz, Schumer, Shaheen, Stabenow, Tester, Udall of New Mexico, Warner, Warren, and Whitehouse. Ms. Baldwin. Ms. Baldwin, aye. Ms. Ayotte. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mrs. Gillibrand, aye. Ms. Heitkamp. Ms. Heitkamp, aye. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blumenthal, aye. Mr. Heinrich. Mr. Heinrich, aye. Senators voting in the negative: Alexander, Ayotte, Barrasso, Blunt, Bozeman, Burr, Chambliss, Chiesa, Coates, Cochran, Collins, Corker, Cornyn, Crapo, Cruz, Enzi, Fisher, Flake, Graham, Grassley, Hatch, Heller, Hoeven, Isaacson, Johans, Johnson of Wisconsin, Lee, McCain, McConnell, Paul, Portman, Rubio, Scott, Sessions, Shelby, Thune, Toomey, Vitter, and Wicker. Mrs. Murray, aye. Mr. Risch. Mr. Risch, no. Mr. Donnelly. Mr. Donnelly, aye. Mrs. Feinstein. Mrs. Feinstein, aye. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Sanders, aye. Mr. Wyden. Mr. Wyden, aye. Mr. Casey. Mr. Casey, aye. Ms. Cantwell. Ms. Cantwell, aye. Mr. Udall. Mr. Udall of Colorado, aye. Ms. Mikulski. Ms. Mikulski, aye. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Menendez, aye. Mrs. McCaskill. Mrs. McCaskill, aye. Mr. Moran. Mr. Moran, no. Ms. Hirono. Ms. Hirono, aye. Ms. Murkowski. Ms. Murkowski, No. Mr. Coons? Mr. Coons, aye. Mr. Roberts? Mr. Roberts? No. Mr. Murphy? Mr. Murphy? Aye. Mr. Cardin? Mr. Cardin? Aye. Mr. Markey? Mr. Markey? Aye. Mr. Baucus? Mr. Baucus? Aye. Mr. Brown? Aye. Mr. Johnson? Mr. Johnson of South Dakota? Aye.
What are Lisa subject to call the chair?
Mr. Pryor? Mr. Pryor? Aye. Mr. Levin? Aye. Mr. Kirk? Mr. Kirk? No. Mr. Harkin? Mr. Harkin? Aye. What are they going to do? Uh-oh. She did vote. Everybody except for Senator Mr. Reed of Nevada, aye.
I did enjoy the
I would like to change my vote to no.
Mr. Reed of Nevada, no.
Was recorded yes?
Mr. President, the Senate is not in order.
Mr. President, was I originally recorded as yes?
The Majority Leader? Yes.
The record should reflect I've changed that to no.
On this vote, the yeas are 53, the nays are 45. 3/5 of the Senate duly chosen and sworn, not having voted in the affirmative, the motion is not agreed to.
President,
The Majority Leader.
I enter a motion to reconsider the vote by which cloture was not invoked on the motion to proceed to S 1569.
The motion is entered.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the senators be permitted now during our morning hour business for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
Pardon me? Well, I've just been told by my able assistant here that we're still on the motion to proceed. So we're not in morning business. Now, Mr. President, just a quick announcement. Democrats will caucus in the Mansfield room forthwith, right now.
Mr. President?
Cleared with
The Majority Leader, the Senate will be in order.
Following the remarks of Senator Landrieu and Johans, I would ask I would just say that the Senate will stand in recess subject to call of the chair.
Without objection.
Mr. President?
The Senator from Louisiana.
Mr. President, I know the members of the Senate are going to be retiring to caucuses to try to figure out how we're going to move forward, and I'm confident with the good work of the people in this chamber we'll find a way.
It's not in order. Cannot hear my colleague.
Senate will be in order. Senate will be in order.
But Mr. President, Senator Johans and I have been working along with many of our colleagues to try to come to some resolution about funding a city in the United States, the District of Columbia, that is not an agency of the federal government, that happens to be the city that the seat of government sits in. And while I'm not going to call for a consent now, I just wanted to ask Senator Johans to just express, if he could, just a few views about this as we try to work our way forward for some time maybe later this afternoon.
Mr. President,
Senator from Nebraska.
I appreciate the good working relationship with Senator Landrieu. We've been talking back and forth. We exchanged phone calls through the evening, never quite did connect, but we have been talking here today. It is our desire to find a solution to this issue. We understand what the District of Columbia is asking for is the simple ability to use its funding. We're talking and working, and I'm optimistic that we're going to find a solution to this. I would also say, Mr. President, as a former mayor, I can only understand the sleepless nights the mayor is going through, and so both of us want to try to solve that, and I think the Senate does. So what I'd like to do is continue our conversations over the next hour or so, and they have been fruitful, and I think we're working our way toward a solution, and I appreciate the opportunity to work with Senator Landrieu.
Now yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the Senate stands in recess subject to the call of the chair.
We were there on our honeymoon and I drove around the Big Island in 5 hours. Wait a minute. Wasn't I just here 5 hours ago? Well, if you want to drive around in 5 hours, I mean, you have a so what didn't happen all this year? Yeah. I think it's more of a personality issue. I've been to paradise in the South Pacific, the white beaches, curving around, the palm trees, and the water clear, and like ready. But you know what? I was bored, but there was nothing. Are you shooting? In about 2 days, I was never not. Somebody back up, that's the guy. I can't. You're the backup. So that's what I mean. I realized I was there. Every time I see you shoot here, doing this, I don't think he's in the back. Well, then that was just stick around, just in case. I'm gonna join the conference. Let me see, what is he gonna be now? Coconuts and. I think the lesson there was paradise is what you make of it. Like Dennis is going to Carmel. Paradise is him. What is it? What green did I
What's the name of the Michael sports machine jacket? What's his name?
Forever on the Spyglass. On Do you want me to go wireless? No, you're just gonna come in and have the thing and go on, and then we're gonna move on. CBS has football too. Well, what do we have, golf?
No, we have the SEC.
Oh, okay. Football.
Scotty's in the hallway, I better get in my seat.
It's quiet back there, man.
Do you want me to feed you now?
Feed me nothing, Trish. You got out of your water, all right?
Yeah. Well, it's coming to the block.
Perfect, that's all I need. You got any other perplex, what do you need, bud?
It's just one of those days.
Okay.
Trying to get out of town.
Yeah.
Calling every 5 minutes.
Well, you're gonna have the next 2 days off.
Yeah, no, I'm just cool.
These guys aren't doing it.
Why are you here then, man? Is this a schedule?
No, but this is what we do. Yeah.
This
I'm the hill guy.
Well, you should leave.
It's not like I'm taking her underneath and making sense.
Oh, okay. As long as you're happy with it.
Your salary in 1 year, that you, it's not even 10 years.
I just wanted to make sure. Well, behave yourself, because you're gonna be on television.
We cover those cuts. Roll away and 1:30.
There is 1:30.
Sorry, he's up there.
So to keep that hair, you just like just go to bed and like, what was You got to work like that, or you just wake up? I could tell. Like, that's why you're radio, not TV.
That was 2 hours. Not burning.
I just heard it on a session that they reset, but I didn't get a.
Well, somebody.
That's right here, but this is all yours. Okay.
Penguins retreat. Play against the top of the hill. Got there a lot, he was scared.
I was like, oh no. This is not good. Exactly. We got 12 points.
Hey, hi.
Switch spots.
No, I'm not the capital.
I'm gonna leave this in there.
I'm gonna be tight. Tomorrow I
Good?
So are you studying at all? Okay.
You good? You don't want to interrupt. Ms. Spit take. Yeah, exactly. That's funny. As funny as that would be for me.
Well, you know,
Oh, we don't want to. I don't know. You're like just doing the splash stuff.
I'm not an
If you're worried, you need to give someone a heads up. Take a picture.
Who are the Redskins playing?
I decided to come in.
Who are they playing?
Yeah, we're good.
Why are they playing? Right, and as long as they're not playing the Bears, the Redskins. Oh, but I'm for the Redskins. Okay.
Are they out?
I won't give a shit. Are you going to try stuff?
Hey Trish, I'm just calling to see what RX ended for this St. Gallery part of it.
Oh, okay.
433?
That would be a highlight.
Thanks a lot.
But why don't I do this? Let's talk then. So you're busy tonight. I'm busy in the afternoon. So why don't we reconvene tomorrow? Okay, great. Okay, take care. Bye-bye. I would love to be
Hey, this is Dave Parkins here. I just want to make sure you guys are getting ready to roll. 433. Oh, okay, thanks very much. So there's the 1245. Yeah, I could. 130.
I'm
gonna set up because this thing isn't gonna happen until after
So, I mean, he gave me, he said, do you want to,
I don't need it.
but, right now, there are no cracks.
probably have to go down there.
Cool, yeah, I'm checking my You guys told her to go to, Cafe Ron, that's all.
That sounds good though.
She said they tried to go this morning, but it was so crowded.
So the Collins press conference is delayed until after the Democratic caucus meeting, it appears, because the Democrats who were planning to come are in their caucus meeting.
Democrats are planning to come to the Collins press conference.
We had hoped that there were gonna be some Democrats coming, but they can't come if they're in their caucus meeting. So we're sort of playing it by ear right now.
Okay.
Until, so I think Reed has a 1:30.
Yeah.
So we may end up being delayed until after that.
Okay, thank you.
So read it 1:30.
Read it 1:30 and then like we call it.
It is.
We're at pause for
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this press conference on behalf of the International Financial and Monetary Committee. We have with us today the chairman of the committee, Minister Tarman, well known to you all. Directly to his right is the First Deputy Managing Director of the fund, David Lipton, and to my right, the Managing Director of the fund, Madame Christine Lagarde. We're on the record. Please identify yourself by name and affiliation. Keep the questions short, if you would. We'll have a few opening remarks from the chairman and from the Managing Director, and then we'll get to your questions. Minister Tarman.
Thank you. Thanks, Jerry. Let me just say a few things by way of broad observations about the meetings we've had. Both our formal plenary sessions, which are relatively open, as well as our smaller group restricted sessions where we speak without staff being present, and it's a direct conversation between ministers and central bank governors. I must say that I'm not trying to talk things up, but we've had a consistently positive and constructive tone in our discussions over the last 2 days. We know there are problems. We know there are near-term risks, the most obvious one being what's going on in the US with regard to the fiscal deficit. We know there are medium-term risks, both in the advanced economies and the emerging economies. But there was a consistently constructive tone on the part of all the major players and the smaller countries as well, advanced and emerging. We felt that we could solve problems together. The spillovers that come about from large country policies were uniformly acknowledged. Everyone knows that these are inevitable consequences as policies are reset. And there was a consistent view from the emerging market economies that the eventual normalization of monetary policy, and you'll see that in our press communique, the eventual normalization of monetary policy as the economies recover in the West will be a net positive for the emerging economies. Will be a net positive. And the
together, so be it.
What? Michigan's playing Penn State, and the bet, it does talk about, the bet is Penn State +2.
So we're on tie.
They're gonna give Penn State 2 points. Michigan is gonna crush Penn State. Michigan's gonna, well, Michigan's like 15-6. All right, who we got here?
Okay.
He just replaced.
You're not
Scott.
Sorry.
Scott. Sorry.
Riveted on Capitol Hill. I can't go anywhere, I can't do anything. We're stuck on the seat.
The Collins et al. Has been postponed indefinitely. We still expect Democratic leaders up here shortly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
No, what did that mean? It's not gonna happen.
Yeah, well, this
What you had to say?
Exactly.
Paper is over.
No, you're fine. Okay, if I stay down right here? Yep. Yeah, you're fine. Shoot, even if you got in, that's part of the action, that's part of the. Yep. Brian Yakovich was,
yeah, but there's nothing here that says.
he was blocking my shot. You know, Brian's taking still pictures for us. So I took a BlackBerry picture and put it right to Facebook. You know, hey, thanks a lot, Brian.
Jury number 30.
Probably Brian called me now. What are you telling that story again? This is David. Hello? What's up? The ABC giver, yeah?
Okay.
Ohio clock style at once, okay. Hang on a second.
Hey, how busy here?
Let me make sure, because you're looking at them right now, right? I'm plugging it into Ohio clock 1, boom. And it says it's their Dangler 1 to hub 49. Yeah, Ohio 1, and their cable is labeled Dangler 1. Okay.
Not very smart.
What's
I got
that?
this one right there.
Yeah, I got this. I got it.
Are you in Ohio clock? Oh, okay. Plug into Ohio clock. CBS SDI Dangler.
Yeah.
Should you all be interested. Lindsay doesn't give a crap.
OJ had unplugged ABC. Well, because he plugged into number 2 on
All right? Everybody else? Everybody wanted it, got it? And here's some very pale white person skin.
What did they unplug us from? Are we still in number 207? What did you unplug ABC from?
No, Ohio clock. Dangler number 2 is in Ohio clock number 1.
Okay.
And Dangler number 2 is in 207.
Right, thank you.
Do you guys usually all use number 2?
I don't think it matters. But I mean, we'd like to all use number 1 because we're A. Makes the sense out of it. CNN, maybe 3. Put some sort of system together.
If somebody would put a system in, yeah. But anyway, OJ came up here, he had plugged into 2 downstairs. So he unplugged ABC at Ohio clock 2. And so you guys obviously leave your.
Stand by my original estimate.
That's the same thing.
Yeah, so we have some content, you know, so we can have some history.
Yeah, that's what.
I like to think some of the positive.
The side thing is that when you plug in somewhere it doesn't save, but then you gotta do the
So we knew that's how, I had to go drywall repair. They said most of the houses. They said crazy. Sits up there like frustrated house. Because Monday, so you know most of these people are gonna wanna be in their district. Yeah, the people guy says there are people who are low behavioral. Nobody asked me about the garbage. They said, "I'll make you stay there."
Hey man, if you go to the coffee shop and the restaurant down there, play a little miniature golf.
Oh, to get elected?
No, I mean, enjoy life.
He had a campaign. He's got a campaign to run. The whole thing, we had the bumper stickers, the
Yeah, we're all
set.
I'm glad you counted me out of that.
He said he was prepared to defend the Constitution of the United States. Bam.
It's all jammed up here, buddy.
It's all jammed up. Bam, that's a sticker. Yep. Oh.
That's all the shit says.
He said the shit stops here. Bam, that's a T-shirt.
I'd get my something tattooed on my forehead if I were you.
I'm knocking the crap out of Congress.
Yeah.
Bam, vote for me. Bam, that's a bumper right
That's tattooed on your arm. All the way down your arm. Right there, muscles. Yeah, turn the TV off and the radio off.
We said, man, this guy's so crazy, you gotta vote for him. Or to be like, I like what he's saying, I'm voting for him. What part is it? I don't know, but I love what he's saying. It makes sense to me. It makes sense to me.
It's a thought. Don't wake me up at siesta, okay? That's what I want to do.
He wants to get strapped out of Congress. That's the guy who knows. Yeah. And then his first act was to come in and vote. I wanted to be just like here. I wanted to be. Hey Dave, you've been so good.
So when you sent me that request, then I got one. Whatever happened to all these steel workers? They don't look like at 58, 59. Golf and fish.
That dream is dead.
We do big shots. Big shots to quit. It's truck full of money.
The ratings would drop. Viewership.
Sorry, I wasn't there to answer your call or anything, and then just like called me and then work out the shit.
We're on our way to number one anyway. These guys are brain Here, listen to this. They said, the only reason I'm working today is they told me I can't find anybody else. Anybody else?
You're the one loud enough to answer the phone.
Wait, I can't you figure out what you So I'm gonna pull it out.
Right.
Somebody else. Well, the message, they give them the message. I mean, they expect you to listen to the answering machine or something. But if they don't get you after a certain time, you think they would.
Man, we haven't gotten time. We better get somebody else. Hey, it's 3 a.m. We need 5 a.m. We better get somebody else.
Oops, the drop back.
Yeah, I forget what the penalty was.
You get like a small penalty and then you can't change your outfit. If you were on until Sally and Anna.
Seems like they would have been young.
Really?
She would start it.
Yeah, and let them really experience infrastructure shutdown. Yeah. I mean, you know, the Tea Party told the council you're ridiculous. They want to dismantle, you know, the funding of the
So we can.
And so it's, it is younger, and now Senate side, and even on the House side, they'll just be able to just shit all these guys out and then come up with a plan. But down there, becoming enemies, that the Tea Party is now like a McConnell or something like that. And there are always, there are these Republicans.
Just the way it is. That's
Really, but they have like this
They had this Westinghouse ABC thing, and then they did satellite too. SNL, satellite, Neil Grasso had.
Yeah, which one?
So they had 2 opportunities to go if they wanted, and Westinghouse and ABC. When they went to Cap Cities, I guess. I remember this. We had the second cable channel. And just stopped. And I'm sure now they were saying, watch this.
I'm standing, yeah. How are you?
Now, where is it? Westinghouse would stay in the business one more day. Yeah. Oh, good. They had one of those when they pulled it, he says,
Okay, did you just take another one? Okay, we're not supposed to do that.
Wow. Are you guys gonna go see
all the advertisers came.
Great, thank you very much.
Anyway.
Couple stories. One, I had a friend who was a producer.
Thanks a lot.
Every time in the van at the bureau, like 3 in the morning, just ratty ass t-shirt, just smelling of food and shit, and watch things going on. One time I was at the White House, and of course, you know, I never keep my mouth shut, but he and Jane Fonda were in the press room, and it was when they still had the reels in the aisleways, and it was just like, she looked like $1 million. I mean, she looked goddess-like. She was so well put together. But he made a comment about it. Look at all the junk around here. I looked at him and I said, free press. Free press, okay? She was really, she was friendly. Yeah, she looked great. She looked great, even that, like a movie she did. She looked really good. She had a tragic book, really, like the blood story. Just like really hard. The emotional stuff with her father, younger women, suicide on the other side of the But, how's her brother making it? I mean, how crazy is her? How did Peter Fonda make it? The trip.
Sounds like you're on a ride to take it all day. But you know, there is an exit, and I actually have an idea how to help you later. Do you want to do something together later? Do you have time?
Now, I try to reach, our TV guy said, okay, it's like guys, we're gonna have a thing. So we were across them too. One time we were staking out, where we always stake out in the driveway, and we were just what, we were like, must have been a big business. Something that hasn't been. What do rich people
Can you be still in a quiet place?
We should be there, but.
Okay, well, we're actually done here in about 3 hours. So yeah, so we'll just, so we'll do something together. We'll do like a little, technique I do to kind of relax and think about the big picture and just kind of, just basically it's almost like vitamin C nasty. It's kind of like a way to just de-stress.
Can we turn it off? Likely not, yeah. And this 5 minutes. Okay. Ish. Can we turn this off?
The longer the better.
Oh, yeah, okay, so
Off?
oh, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Or you could say, they voted on.
Yeah, unfortunately, people are talking.
Okay, but I'll cut you later. Love you back.
It's your paper, right? You're the guy. We've been told that you guys did a fair thing and a fair deal, right? Everyone's, only on two ones.
No, about 5 minutes. And there may be more going on. Yeah, I know, Nolan decided that since everybody else was there, he had to quickly end. Anyway, just go ahead and take it. Thanks.
Sure. I keep thinking that when you start going together, you come to the end. Well, he apparently, Michael Mann did something, he must have probably come on or something. Giving the Republicans the background. Really?
That was great.
That should be a break. It's a good meeting.
Yeah, I saw that, and I'll wait, because I haven't worked on it. That's fine, no, I think that's okay. I mean, we're,
set up, rules? I was happy to do it. The guy during the summer heat wave. No, with the 105, 105. It's no good. The technology was on a small plane. This might be the last thing. Oh, we got two of them. So imagine it was and it wasn't particularly cold. A couple were shot with plane crash based on. So when you look at this weather data, the data you're looking at is 20 minutes old. So if you see, oh, there's a storm approaching 50, hey, honey, if we all last, we can make it. So you see the storm coming in your way, so you start flying down 50 and you go away from it. And you end up flying straight into the storm, which you can't get out of because, you know, it's like, oh, wow, what is this? I mean, short of turning around and going back where you came from, is what you should do. You don't know what to do because your weather data is old. So that's what the story is. So we did a ground interview. And the guy goes, so you guys are all on this. And he looks at me, he goes, yeah, the lighter I'm 290, so with the camera, I'm about 320. I said, I can take off my boots, I can take off whatever you tell me to take off. I'll tell you what, I ain't going off. That's the source of material. No. There's too late. Coming from down. There's too late, up too early. But for the okay, let's do it tomorrow. And the pilots are big time. You know, we're like 600 pounds, so they look at the report, and she's like, you know, and I said, you got it. I said, oh, she's part of her team. So she goes, well, I don't know. It costs a shitload of money to do it. Well, you said configuration. If I was managing another issue, I don't know. So the producer is like, what does all this mean? Is this safe? Is this safe? Is this not safe? We don't need this. Yeah, we got good with what we got. Let's go. And then the guy we talked to comes out and he goes, hey, Robert, sorry. You got a huge file, and then we got you. Yeah. So he yells over it. So this citizen is pulling out to the gas. Don't put me in there. How much gas is in that for you? I got 3 gallons.
Do you have any news, Mike?
I think they're approaching. Okay.
Oh, my God. Adjust.
Closer to enjoying the rest of my Saturday. Okay.
Love my chart.
Give me your clock.
Yeah, I like it.
This morning at 9 o'clock, I met with Senator McConnell. The meeting was set up last night, late. Senator McConnell indicated that Senator Alexander, as the ranking member of the Rules Committee, had worked for a number of years with Senator Schumer. That I was concerned, as you all know, there were different Republican offers going around or discussions with my senators So I called Senator Alexander and said, what's going on? Anyway, to shorten the story here a little bit, because you probably don't need to hear all this, he said, I'm representing Senator McConnell. And later in the evening, he asked if I would meet with him and Senator Schumer and Senator McConnell. And I said, yes, we met at 9 o'clock this morning. The conversations were extremely cordial, but very preliminary, of course. Nothing conclusive. But I hope that our talking is some solace to the American people and to the world. This hasn't happened until now. Senator McConnell asked to meet with me. I was happy to do that. This should be seen as something very positive. Even though we don't have anything done yet, and a long ways to go before anything like that will happen. And what I say, that's a relative term. In minutes, hours, days, we're trying to figure out a way to go forward. Susan Collins is one of my favorite senators, Democrat or Republican. I appreciate her efforts, as always, to find a consensus. But the plan that she suggested, that I've seen in writing, is not going to go anyplace at this stage. The two good things in it: number one, it opens the government. Number two, extends the debt ceiling. But other than that, there's little agreement with us. Now, I want to make sure that that people here understand that we have some problems with that, as does the White House with the so-called Collins plan. As I explained to Senator McConnell and Senator Alexander this morning, they're not doing us a favor by reopening the government. They're not doing us a favor by extending the debt ceiling. That's part of our jobs. That's why we've said, open the government, let us pay our bills, and we need to do that before we have any agreement on what goes after that. This is not a concession. This is basically doing our jobs. This is what we're supposed to. Default is 4 days away. And I say again, I'm grateful and thankful that Senator McConnell reached out to me. I was happy to do that. I had a piece of legislation on the floor today to extend the debt ceiling for a year. It's hard for me to comprehend, but every Republican voted against this. This was a motion to proceed to the measure so that we could debate it. If they had allowed us to invoke cloture on this, we would have had 30 hours, use every minute of it if they wanted to see if we could come up with something. They just voted no. Now, procedurally, you guys, you know how it works around here. That's not easy to move forward. I can't imagine why they did that. Defaulting our debt will risk millions of Americans' jobs, not thousands, not tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands, millions of jobs. Social Security checks, Medicare payments, even our military. And then we've got people over in the House saying, well, that's okay, we can prioritize them. There isn't a reasonable person in the economy any place that thinks that would work. We want to reopen the government, pay our bills so we can move forward with good faith negotiations on a long-term budget. That's what Senator McConnell and I are working on. Senator Durbin.
People of America have seen this movie several times. The American damsel is tied to the tracks, and the engine is bearing down, and the question is whether or not Congress at the last minute will come to the rescue and save this country. And I think some of them have said, well, ultimately they'll work it out. And I think there is a reason to believe that ultimately we will work it out. But let's be honest where we are. We saw it today on the Senate floor. First, we ended up with a sad outcome when it came to this vote. troubling to me that not a single Republican would step up and allow us to start the debate on whether or not we avoid the debt ceiling default in just 4 days, as Senator Reid has said. Not a single Republican would step forward. In fact, some had said, we're looking forward to this vote to vote no. I don't understand their logic, but that's what they said. But before people give up hope and hear the train whistle and wonder if this is going to end up in the right way, at the same time, if you witness the floor of the Senate, there were active conversations going on between senators of both political parties. Beyond what Senator Reid mentioned in his earlier meeting with Senator McConnell, there is an active conversation between Republicans and Democrats in the Senate. Why? We understand how important this is. We understand how much damage has been done already to 800,000 furloughed federal employees and all the people who rely on government services. And we realize the potential damage to 300 million plus Americans if we default on this debt for the first time in history. It's been spelled out, and only those flat earth economists who somehow inspire a handful of extreme Republicans, aside from them, the economists have told us in clear terms, we're dealing with increases in interest rates for everybody, every individual, every family, every business, and our nation. And the reputation of the United States is going to be damaged in a way it's never been damaged. That's how serious it is. And that's why I believe these conversations are underway and why they must proceed. We're going to continue to open up these channels and try to find a way to deal with this. It is troubling. It is heartbreaking to think we have reached this point. We are motivated not only by what's good for the nation, but by the fact that the House Republicans have failed, utterly failed, in leadership in terms of coming forward and coming up with a solution. Now we have to accept the responsibility, and I hope we can rise to that.
First, I'd like to say we had a very good caucus today. Democrats were unified, and we're all united around the principles of open the government, pay our bills, and let's negotiate. So today brings bad news and good news. The bad news is that the motion to proceed so that we could pay our bills failed because it didn't get the 60 votes, it didn't get the bipartisan support that we had hoped. This is playing with fire. We don't know when the markets will react to this. You can't say it'll be no sooner than next Thursday. I worry on Monday that when the American markets open, maybe because of this vote, that they will start worrying, and not only will the stock market go down, but interest rates go up and the value of the value of U.S. Treasuries decline. It's very serious. And it would have been a whole lot better if we just put this aside and had a 100-0 vote to pay our bills. That didn't happen. The good news is that the meeting that Senator Reid and I had with Senator Alexander and Senator McConnell give me a little bit of cause for optimism. Clearly, the talks are in their very early stages. But I believe Senator McConnell showed goodwill. I believe he wants to come to a solution. I believe he knows how serious it is to default. And my view is that it will be the Senate that will have to come to an agreement here because the House Republicans seem so divided and in such disarray, they don't have a plan. And so the hope is that at the end of the day, sooner rather than later, in a bipartisan way, we can come together and take this burden off the shoulders of the American worker, the American family, and the American economy by coming up with a fair, reasonable solution. As Leader Reid said, we made clear that we don't regard it as a concession to open up the government. We don't regard it as a concession to say we want to pay our bills. That is our job, and we should all be doing our job. And figuring out a way to stick to those principles and come up with a bipartisan agreement is our job over the next few days. I'm considerably more optimistic today than I was yesterday as a result of our meetings and as a result of many other things that have happened. And we're all ready to roll up our sleeves and work to avoid this calamity. And we're looking for our colleagues on the other side of the aisle to join us.
You know, here it is on a Saturday when a lot of families are focused on football and what they're going to have for Sunday morning brunch. We here in Congress have a responsibility to make sure that they are not worried about their paycheck or about the economic future of this country or whether or not we're going to be able to work together. We stand here very strong as Democrats to say that we are willing to work together when the government is open, and we've told the country, the economy, that we're going to pay our bills. Extremely important for us. There are conversations going on. They are critical. But I think we also have to remember back to how we got here. When we agreed to have a continuing resolution so we could work on the broader issues that we all have big disagreements about, and the House Republicans decided they were going to take the Obamacare hostage and shut down our government, which has now bled into a point where we are about to not pay our bills and hurt our economy. They have to stop asking for hostages in order for our country to be okay, for families to be able to have breakfast tomorrow morning without worrying about what's going to happen on Monday morning in the stock market. As Democrats, we stand ready to negotiate. None of us believes we're going to get our way at the end of the day, but we shouldn't be holding our country and our families and our communities hostage any longer. We ask the House Republicans to stand up, pass the continuing resolution that's in front of them, and then work with us on the challenges in front of us.
Yes.
Mr. Reed, you've been very firm about what you will and will not accept in terms of the deal. Mr. McConnell doesn't seem to have much wiggle room either with Senate Republicans. So what do you think you can accomplish? What do you have to talk about?
We are absolutely right. We should never have had the conversation, a waste of time. I mean, be serious. He's got problems. I've got problems. That's what arrangements are made, how arrangements are made. This is a piece of legislation. We're going to try to work to come up with a compromise. We're not going to do that until the government reopens and there's a way to pay our bills. So Senator McConnell and I have been in this body a long time. We've done things for a long time together. I know him. He knows me. We don't agree on everything, and that's, as you know, probably an understatement. But we were whips together a long time ago. We have fond memories of our days together when others could take the responsibility we now have to take. But we did some good things together. We revamped government together as whips. So this is what legislation is all about. If we have political scientists out there now, this is a classic case of what legislation is all about. The problem we've had in recent years is we've had too little of this, too little sitting down trying to work out problems. That's what we're doing now.
To what extent are you taking into account what the House of Representatives can accept in your talks with Senator McConnell?
I don't think that's my responsibility. I think it's Senator McConnell's.
How do you get the government reopened? You said you'll be happy to compromise after the government is reopened. How do you get the government reopened?
Well, there's a resolution in the House they could pass just like that, and it wouldn't do that. We hope that we can do it for a longer period of time, but that certainly would be a step in the right direction.
Any indication you've received that the House is about to make an about-face?
I'm not going to do anything to harm anybody over there who I've talked with, and saying more now wouldn't help. Okay. Yeah.
How long would you like the CR to be, and how long would you like the debt limit?
Well, I would like the debt ceiling to be for 20 years, and I'd like the CR to be for 10 years. But well, I think the CR with our numbers, of course. But you know, we are negotiating there. It is not. I'm not locked in stone. Senator Murray has focused in my head, as has the president and others, that we have to be very careful because we have this automatic sequestration that kicks in January 15th. And so any date, we have to take that into consideration. Whether
before You want to resolve this before January 15th then?
Well, I'd like to resolve it now. There's no reason we couldn't resolve it now. We don't have that done yet. When I say now, I mean in the next 48 hours.
Could you be open to any changes on Obamacare, delaying the medical device tax for 3 years?
Isn't it interesting, everybody, how that's not part of the discussion anymore? A week ago, tomorrow, when the speaker was on national TV, a talk show, he started off on Obamacare. That lasted about, maybe 30 seconds, and then he switched to spending. That's where he kept wanting to have the conversation. Obamacare is no longer their number one issue. Their number one issue is to do anything they can to divert attention from the fools they've made of themselves on Obamacare. So we're taking nothing off the table. That includes, and I sent the speaker a letter, and of course McConnell got a copy of that letter. We're willing to talk about anything. There are no limits. We'll talk about health care, which includes, of course, Obamacare. We're willing to talk about anything. One last question.
How much are you considering the markets?
Yes.
The Republicans want entitlement reform as part of this deal. They also want to delay the medical device tax. Since you don't consider reopening the government or raising the debt limit a concession, do Republicans have to bring some real concessions to the table to get some of the things they want?
You know, everybody, I appreciate that's your jobs, to be as probing and as inquisitive as you need to be. But I'm not going to negotiate here with you folks. And I'm long since, I should say a few weeks ago, I'm not negotiating with myself anymore. I did that for a while. It didn't work. Thanks.
What's the process? When's the next negotiation? Anything?
No, I'll just grab this and then put this.
Is it just, yeah, that stay here or goes down?
This, can you fold this up and just put it in that closet right there? So I guess Senator Collins can go home. Yes. Ciao, Bella.
Thank you, Dexter. Now our next is that's it, right, Mike? They're going away, they're done.
Nothing else is booked at this time.
All of this thing went away, they just canceled.
That's my understanding, yeah.
Yeah, it's not postponed anymore, it's flat out canceled.
Are they still in session? That was sort of they may go back into session.
No.
We're not done with that.
Thanks for turning the light on. Thanks. Dexter, I think you and I should be thinking about it. Dosh or something.
Downstairs is open.
I think so. I think we should go.
What Jim is up to.